As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. Welcome to lectionary vlog number 31, the 20th Sunday after Pentecost, 18th of October, 2020. Our first reading is the push of Moses to get going and to move towards the promised land, and the promise that God's glory will go with Moses, and that Moses is going to have a special relationship with God. And I love this text here. And God said to Moses, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Is there anything more that we need than God's presence? And with that presence, even in the midst of crisis and cauldrons and conflicts, that we can still experience that rest, that peace that passes all understanding. Our psalm is a Psalm 99, the first 9 verses, and the Lord God reigns. Let the people tremble. God sits enthroned between the cherubim. Let the earth shake. Of course, that's the reference to the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And the story of God's greatness in Zion and God's promises to God's people. He is high above all people. So the first thing we get is God's present with us, but he's above us. So he's above us and within us. And that's the kind of tension that we've got to understand. That's the transcendence. God is beyond, above. But the immanence, God is within and among us. And so we live in that cruciform way of God beyond, above, and God within, among us. A great psalm. The Thessalonians reading is, if the Bible were written, were compiled in chronological order, and this is the Second Testament now, it would not begin, you would open up the New Testament, and you wouldn't begin with Matthew. Of course, even Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't in chronological order, because if the Gospels were in chronological order, Mark would come first. But if the whole of the New Testament were in chronological order, these would be the opening words of the New Testament. Are you ready? Paul, Silas, and Timothy, to the church of the Thessalonians, which is in God the Father and in the Lord Jesus Christ, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. That would be the opening words of the New Testament, because the first, earliest book written in the New Testament is 1 Thessalonians. So that's our epistle reading. But what I want us to do is I want us to look at the gospel reading. The gospel reading is Matthew, the 22nd chapter. And it's this little exchange that Jesus has with his disciples is also found in Mark and in Luke. So you've got 3 of the Gospels here having this little exchange. And the background is, and you all, this is a very familiar passage, but I'm still going to read it. Then the Pharisees went and took counsel to entangle him in his words. They sent their disciples to him with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God truthfully and are swayed by no one, for you do not regard the persons of men. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, "Why test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money." They brought him a denarius. He said to them, "Whose is this image and inscription?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "You render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard these words, they were amazed and left him and went on their way. It's in this is the Matthew rendition. There's also Mark telling of the story, a Luke telling of the story. And it's a classic case of how do we handle. We have a faith religion in Jesus the Christ, but we also live in a nation. And so we also have what scholars call a civil religion. And every nation has a different, Japanese have a different civil religion, Canadians have a different civil religion, everybody. So when the nation state takes on an identity, and right now we're experiencing the conflict in that identity as the election is approaching. But that identity collectively as a nation will form what is called a civil religion. The key is to keep your civil religion under your faith religion. Make it not so that it's a religion so much as their faith religion. And because if you mix the two, or the civil religion becomes ascendant over your faith religion, that's called idolatry. You got a golden calf and you're in deep doo-doo. So the disciples, they're asking, it's April 15th, it's tax time. What do we do? Do we honor civil religion? Do we pay taxes to Caesar? Do we form a conscientious objection and refuse to get involved in the political and civil life of the state that we're in? And clearly, Jesus has an answer. Notice how he answers the question. He answers it semiotically. In other words, he answers it by not giving you three things that you got to remember in terms of your relationship to the state. He doesn't give you a blueprint for how you handle Caesar. He doesn't give you some kind of a guideline and with guardrails about how, no. He does the same thing. I mean, in Luke 17, remember the disciples come to him and say, Lord, increase our faith. How do we get stronger and deeper in faith? And Jesus doesn't give them, okay, these are the 7 things you got to remember about how to deepen and strengthen your faith. He says, what's the smallest seed we can find around here? Now, it's not really the smallest seed in nature, but it's really tiny, like 1 millimeter. There's a mustard seed. See this mustard seed? He said, if you had the faith of just this mustard seed, just this little grain, you get a bunch of them together. Of course, you have vinegar and water, you have mustard. But if you just had the faith in this, you could move a mulberry tree, you could move a mountain with the faith in just this little speck of a seed, just this little tiny grain. And so he answers a question with an image and a narrative that you can't forget. Faith as small as a mustard seed can move a mountain. Actually, a mustard bush can get 30 feet high, so a little tiny 30 feet. And so he does the same thing here. The disciples, do we have to pay Caesar anything, really? And Jesus, okay, what you got in your pocket? Well, they pull out a coin. Okay, what image is on that coin? Well, it's Caesar's image. Okay, well, it's Caesar's. The coin Caesar's. So you give to Caesar what's Caesar's. But then notice he makes this loop. And many times we don't, this is a huge loop, and we don't connect the dots sufficiently, so that we miss the moment. Because he doesn't say, okay, what image is on you? But he implies the image of the coin is on Caesar. So you give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And then he goes, but you give to God what's God's. Because what image is on you is not Caesar. You're created in the image of God. And so you give to God what is God's, which is you. So you don't owe Caesar you. Give him his money. What's money anyway? But you got to make sure that you give to God what's God's, which is you. You don't give Caesar you. You give God you. And this is a huge way in which Jesus over and over again deals with life questions. And we want to turn his answers into propositions and points and principles and regulations and guidelines and 7 habits of, no. We've got to read it as he gave it. You give to Caesar what's Caesar's. You give to God what's God's. And you have other taxation stories. There went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Somebody did a little play with Hark the Herald Angels Sing, the Charles Wesley hymn, and hark the tax collectors sing, glory to the state we bring, or on earth the sell, the lash, we have need for lots of cash. So you can look at it many ways. But you give to Caesar your taxes, but you give to God what is God's, which is you. But you includes money. And this is a way in which, so we've got to look at the whole issue here of how do faith and finances come together. And the greatest medieval Sephardic theologian, he was also an astronomer and a physician. His name was Moses Maimonides. And in the 12th century, he came up with a 8-fold level of giving. As we give to God what is God's, which is us, then what does that mean in terms of our own economic life? And how do we live gratefully and givingly if God's image is on us and we're being faithful to God and not faithful to Caesar, except with what we owe Caesar? And so he has, this is on an ascending level. So I'm going to start at the bottom with number 8. I'm going to give you the 8 levels of giving. It's in Hebrew, it's called charity, tzedakah. But here they are. Number 8, when donations are given grudgingly, that's the bottom level. It means you still give, but you got to give grudgingly. There's an old, God loveth a cheerful giver, but God also accepteth from a grouch. So whether you're cheerfully giving or grudgingly giving, you still got to give to God. So the 8th level, the bottom level of giving is you give even if you're grudging about it, but you still give. Number 7, when you give less than you should, but you do so cheerfully. Number 6, when you give directly to the poor when they ask. Number 5, when you give directly to the poor and needy, the widows and orphans. And by the way, in the early church, the widows were seen as the altars of God. Isn't that a marvelous phrase? Widows, the altars of God. And so when you give directly to the needy without being asked. Number 4, donations when the recipient is aware of your identity, but you still don't know the specific identity of the recipient. So they know who you are, but you're giving to them without knowing who they are and knowing the whole specifics of their story. I love how Pope Francis has insisted that when we do this, when we give to somebody that we don't know, but we don't treat them as if we don't know them. We treat them with honor and dignity. And he insists that you look them in the eyes. You never give them money without looking them in the eyes. The gesture of a Christian is not about offloading your sense of guilt. It's about looking at the eyes of another so you can see in those eyes your own inner poverty. And their poverty reminds you of your poverty as well. Number 3, donations when the donor is aware to whom the charity is being given, but the recipient is unaware of the source. So in other words, you know where it's going, but they don't know where it's coming from. So you're anonymous giving. That's number 3. Number 2, giving in such a way that both the giver and the receiver are unknown to each other. That's the second highest level of giving. The highest level of giving, and I'm going to just read to you Moses Maimonides here. The highest form of charity is to help sustain a person before they become impoverished by offering a substantial gift in a dignified manner or by extending a suitable loan or by helping them find employment or establish themselves in business so as to make it unnecessary for them to become dependent on others to begin with. This is the highest form of giving. A giving that moves others towards self-sufficiency and enhancing their self-esteem and bringing about a relationship between the rich and the poor, the needy, and we're all needy. And so creating that relationship itself so that the person is not put in a dependent or a posture of needing for your charity. The high 8 levels of giving. I love how that is phrased by Moses Maimonides. And the highest is the relational test, the relational standard of being in a relationship with those that are needy and making them a part of your community. And this is the original "This Is Me," okay? I'm going to give you the original "This Is Me." And when Jesus is hosting his disciples in the upper room, and we translate it, "This is my body." He says, "This is my body broken for you. This is my body." See, you can say that in Greek, and the Gospels, are written here, and Paul wrote it, and you can say it in Greek. But Jesus didn't speak Greek here with his disciples. He spoke probably Aramaic, and in neither Aramaic or Hebrew is there the construction, "This is my body." It's impossible to say. There's no equivalent of "is" in body, is body in the Aramaic or the Hebrew. It's linguistically impossible, in other words, for Jesus to have said, "This is my body." So what did he really say? And so what he really said, as he is sharing this Passover meal, and then after the supper was over, he took the bread. It's the sobremesa time, if you will, the time you look forward to the most after the meal, when the conversation takes place, you have a little dessert. And so Jesus, and he looks at the table with all of his disciples. And he says, are you ready? "This is me." This is me, not just this bread. Not just this bread he's holding up here, but this is me. Do this in other words, koinonia, table fellowship, the time together with each other and with the strangers, hospitality to the strangers. The word hospital, you don't have hospitals until Jesus and the Christians, because this idea of you're taking care of people, you're in a relationship with people that you don't know and you aren't responsible for. They're not your neighbors, they're not your family, they're not even your friends, they're strange. Yes. This is me. All of this. Not just this is my body, but this is myself. In my totality is this community, this koinonia, this fellowship. This is my total self. So you can't separate Jesus's personal corporeal body from his corporate communal body. The table fellowship is key. And it's not just holding up a piece of bread and saying, this is me. It's this. The original "This is me," spoken by Jesus at the upper room. This is what I'm really like. This time we're having together, this is me. Do this in remembrance of me. Keep doing this. Keep doing me this. So, the original, "This is me," Jesus. And we're to lead "This is me" lives that invite to the table those, you owe Caesar your taxes, but you give to God you. And part of you is me. This is me. Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.